Welcome back to yet another analysis of the classical Japanese that occurs in Okami. Specifically, when you get the celestial brush techniques from the celestial brush guardian gods. I don't exactly quite remember what they're called, but the guys who give you the fancy celestial brush techniques. Anyway, today we are going to be looking at the first of the three Hanagami, the three monkey gods who give you the different powers based on plant material. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the Saki no Hanagami, Saki meaning to bloom or the blooming of, so the one who gives you the ability where you draw a little circle around like trees and certain other plants and they sprout into flower, they just poof, pop out in gorgeous arrays. Now, if you already have seen some previous videos and you know what classical Japanese is, please feel free to skip ahead from this next little bit that I'm going to be doing, because I am going to explain what classical Japanese is and why it's important just briefly. So for those of you who are first-time comers, classical Japanese is the old Japanese, the old school Japanese, the Japanese that was really spoken about 1,000 years ago, primarily in the capital of Heian, aka modern-day Kyoto. And those aristocrats, those people who lived in the capital, and using their language, they laid the foundations for much of Japanese culture for the rest of time. And because they laid the foundations of Japanese culture, they wrote lots of poetry, they wrote lots of stories and other just random musings, and their writings spread all over the country and made them super famous. And because they were the height, the pinnacle of what it meant to be a cultured individual, their language also spread across the entirety of the country, because at the time the country was very divided and there were lots of regional dialects, and so it was kind of hard for people to understand each other sometimes. However, using this dialect of Japanese from 1,000 years ago in the capital, that spread all over the country and was kind of used as a lingua franca, a language that united everybody, that everybody could learn and communicate in. And so because of that, in games and anime, when you have a character who's some kind of a god, or usually radiating some kind of ancient mysterious power, a lot of times what the writers will do is they will have these characters speak or read or write or whatever in classical Japanese to give them this air of majesty, of ancient wisdom that surpasses the understanding of mortal men. It's also kind of reverential, it's almost worshipful, and it's super cool. So this does occur in Okami if you play in the Japanese version when you get the new celestial brush techniques, and fittingly enough, you get them from gods, right? The zodiac animals that are hiding in constellations in the sky, and when you find them, they come down and they don't just speak to you in regular Japanese when you play the Japanese version of the game. If you play the English version of the game, they just speak to you in regular English, which is kind of boring, but whatever. But if you play it in Japanese, they come down and they speak to you in classical Japanese, or mostly classical Japanese. As we will see, it's not purely classical Japanese. It's made in such a way for modern Japanese people to understand it a little bit better, because although most Japanese people do study classical Japanese in school, it is rather difficult for them to fully comprehend it. Not saying I fully comprehend it, but I have put a lot of time into trying to understand it. Anyway, let's just get on with the analysis, shall we? Okay, actually the first thing that I want to point out, if you notice when he kneels down, he swipes his hand across the front of him. Basically, that's there to simulate the idea of he's wearing some of those old school, really billowy long kimonos, which was a sign of high status, of aristocracy. And when he kneels, he moves them out of the way so that he can kneel, even though he's not technically actually wearing anything. But it's a very elegant, dignified thing to do when you sit down. The second thing I want to point out about this Saki no Hanagami, you can actually see his name right there, is the instrument that he's using is called a sho, and it was used in Heian court music very often. Some people call it the mouth organ, because as you can see, it's got all of these weird, different leveled pipes, and you blow into a little pipe here, and then it comes out, and I think you can control, there's some holes, obviously, it's kind of like a flute in that regard, but you control it. And it makes, even though these were made out of, I believe, wood or maybe bamboo, it has this really almost otherworldly sound to it. It's fascinating. Hopefully I can play some for you here and you can listen. But it's just such an interesting instrument. I'm not a huge fan of it. Like, I wouldn't want to sit down, and I probably wouldn't want to listen to somebody just absolutely going to town on one of these things, just going nuts with it. But it is still a fascinating instrument, and it does add this really austere, dignified, quasi-mysterious atmosphere to music when you put it in there. It's a fascinating little instrument, and it kind of blows my mind that you can get a sound like this out of something made out of wood or bamboo. Anyways, let's continue. Okay. So this is the first thing, as you've seen in the previous other two videos. O warera ga jibo Amaterasu o mikami. O is just like an exclamatory thing. It's like, ah, oh, I see. Then you have warera ga, comes from the root word ware, which is the first person pronoun, means I. And then we have warera, which makes it plural, so it goes from I to we. And then warera ga, ga is in this instance, it's a possessive particle. It denotes mine, or belonging to, in this case, us. Now, what is this us, this thing belonging to us, our, okay, is jibo. Jibo means charity, virtue, virtuousness, righteousness, good, loving, kindness, compassionate, those kinds of things. And then we have bo, which means mother. So jibo is a Chinese loanword that means our compassionate mother, our loving mother, our great mother. Amaterasu o mikami. Amaterasu is the name of this wolf, which is the goddess Amaterasu, the sun goddess in wolf form, which is a play on of words because Okami can mean wolf, but Okami can also be written with the characters for great god, the great god, aka the wolf. So it's a little fun play on of words. But Amaterasu's name literally comes from two words, ame, meaning heaven, sky, and terasu, which means to shine. So one of the ways you can translate Amaterasu's name is heaven shining, i.e. the sun. The thing that shines in the heavens, that lightens the heavens up, that brightens up everything. And then we have the word Okami, O meaning great or big, Kami meaning God. Now, in between Okami, there is this mi, which is an honorific thing that happens a lot in, say, the really, really old myths and stuff. It means mighty or powerful. It's kind of an honorific thing. So, O mean Kami means great, powerful, honorific God. So, oh, our loving mother, our compassionate mother, great, honorific God, heaven shining. Okay, now we finally get to some actual unique dialogue here. Mono no ke ni tsukare, fuzerare taru waga mi yo. Okay? So if you've seen the previous video or the previous two videos, you will recognize some of this stuff. Mono no ke. Mono means a thing. Just a physical, tangible thing that you can touch. Maybe not even necessarily touch, but like, it's not an idea. It's a thing, okay? And then no, in this instance, just means of. Now, you can translate it to of. However, if you do that, you do have to switch the things on either side of the of if you translate it into English. For example, you can say the Book of Five Rings. Miyamoto Musashi's The Book of Five Rings. Now, the way you say it in Japanese is 5 rings of book. Okay, Gorin no sho means 5 rings of book because you switched it around. We say the Book of 5 Rings. They say 5 rings of book. And so what we've got here is mono no ke. Ke here means, this is kind of hard to translate because ke can mean something like spirit, atmosphere, something that's, it's a thing. It's an actual physical thing. However, it's an intangible thing that you can't really touch. It's atmospheric is the only thing that I can think of. It's a spirit kind of a thing. It's the spirit that pervades whatever is going on, right? So mononoke means the spirit of things, the thing spirit, okay? And one other thing is that this kanji ke is written with the kanji for ayashi or ayash, which means suspicious, strange, uneasy, something that you don't understand that makes you uneasy, because there can be things that you don't understand that do make you really interested. It's like, oh, that's fascinating, I want to know more. This is more like a, something's up, I don't like where this is going. So you've got mononoke means a thing spirit, a thing strange, a strange thing. Actually, that's probably the best word. A strange thing, which basically just means an evil spirit, a bad thing. You know, a spirit that comes and causes problems. You don't like it. So, mononoke ni. Now, ni is a particle. It's the preposition particle as I'm starting to come and refer to it. It means at, in, on, to, or by, something kind of like that. In this instance, by is probably the best way to translate it because it is pointing to the thing that is doing the action, and the action is actually a passive verb. It is a passive thing. I'll explain that in just a second. So, by a spirit is what you can translate to mononoke ni. Tsukare. Now this word here comes from the root verb tsuku, which tsuku is actually a very broad word that can mean a lot of different things. But in this instance, with the kanji that's being used to write it, it means possess. And not possess in like, I just have a thing. This is spiritual demonic possession. This is having your being taken over by a spirit. However, we go from the root verb tsuku to tsuka, and then we add this re. Now what this does is it takes the verb to possess and turns it passive. So instead of to possess, it becomes be possessed by a spirit. So be possessed by a spirit. However, the ending form of the passive form of this verb, so we go from tsuku to tsukaru, is what the passive form would be, the ending form of the passive form. However, we go from tsukaru to tsukare because that is the attaching form, I guess you could say. That is the continuation form, because we're not done with the sentence. So he says, being possessed by a spirit and. Being possessed by a spirit, mononoke ni tsukare, fuzeirare taru. And once again, we have another passive verb. So this guy is speaking constantly in the passive tense. Now here, this is a Chinese loanword, fu, okay? Fu means to seal. However, because this is a Chinese loanword, it doesn't have a natural verbal conjugation like we would normally expect, because I guess the Japanese just, they probably did have a word for it, but sometimes, like a lot of times in English, we can refer to things with either native English words or words that come from native English words, but sometimes it sounds better to give it a little bit of a French flair or a Latin flair, an ancient Latin flair. So instead of saying something is wolfish or wolfish, we can say it's lupine, right? Or instead of saying something is cat-like, we can say feline. Ooh, see, doesn't that just sound much more sophisticated? The same thing can be said in certain instances in Japanese with ancient Chinese, because the ancient Chinese was kind of the language of the cultured elite. It was the language that all of the people who understood science and history and all of the things, all of the cultural things. China was the big boy on the block in East Asia for most of world history, and their culture spread all over the place. And so to be able to speak and use the Chinese language was a mark of sophistication and intelligence and education. So here we have fuzeirare taru. Fu again means to seal, but we have to turn it into a verb, so we add the su on the end. Su is the classical Japanese for do. In modern Japanese, it is suru. However, I don't know why they did this, but for whatever reason, they have to voice this su. So fuzu goes from fu, which just means general, like the concept of to seal, the concept of a seal. And then we have fuzu, which would turn it into an actual verb, to seal. So we go from fu, seal, fuzu, which means to seal. However, again, like I said, we are in the passive voice. So we go from fuzu to fuzeiraru. Now, fuzeiraru would be the ending form. But again, we are not in the ending form here. So we go from fuzeiraru to fuzeirare because we are attaching, we're keeping it in that attachment form, that continuation form, because we are then attaching the auxiliary, the helping verb, the auxiliary verb, the jodoshi, taru. Now, taru means completed or in a continuation of an existing process. Like you do a thing and then you can continue in that state for longer. So fuzeirare taru, being sealed and then being sealed, and not just like it's sealed and then it's done and then we just forget about it. It's sealed and then I'm continually persisting in this state of being sealed. However, one more thing is that taru, the ending form, or the normal form, I guess you could say, the ending form is actually tari. However, we have it in this taru because taru turns it into the attributive form. And the reason why we have the attributive form is because we use it to modify nouns, to explain and describe nouns that come after it. And the noun that comes after it is wagami. Okay? And if you've seen the previous video, you know what wagami is. So waga comes from the word that we just saw in the previous slide, the previous little box. It comes from ware. Ware means I. However, when you want to make ware possessive, right? So you want to say, instead of me or I, you want to say it's mine or my whatever. You go from ware, you drop the re, and then you add the ga on there, which turns it possessive. So instead of ware, waga. So wagaya is something that modern Japanese people will still say. Wagaya means my house. Wagakuni means my country. In this instance, we have waga mi. Mi means body, I guess you could say, physical body. But when you say it like this, wagami, it means like my person or I myself. It's a little bit of it's kind of like a first person pronoun, but it's a little less direct. It's just saying instead of saying me or I do this thing, which is really like strong, straightforward, like I'm just doing this. It's a little more beat around the bush, you know. It's like, oh, but I myself, my person is doing whatever or has the thing done to whatever. And then wagami is followed by the particle o, which denotes the object of a sentence, which means that it is the thing that is going to be having the action done to it. So again, dog eats food. Dog is the subject, which would normally in classical Japanese be marked with a no or a ga. And then eats is a modern, in classical Japanese, it would be ku, which means to eat or to bite technically, but that is the action. And then food, how we say in English, food is the object. It is the thing that is having the action done to it, the action being eating, and the thing doing the action is the dog. In classical Japanese, we would say inu no kuimono. Kuimono is food. O, meaning that that's what's having the action done to it, and then the action is ku, means to eat. So this panel here, my person being possessed by a spirit and sealed, and then we're going to do something to this person. Omoto no tsuriki ni te sukui tamawari makoto ni osore oku soro. Okay, this is a very interesting part. So again, if you've seen the previous videos, you will know what omoto is. Just to go over it quickly, omoto is a very honorific quasi second person pronoun. This game treats it as basically just a second person pronoun. It means honorific you. However, if you read classical Japanese, that's not quite how it would work. So this o here is just an honorific thing. You can put it in front of stuff and make it honorific. Moto here is a really interesting kanji, okay? Is a really interesting idea because it's written with the kanji for to allow, to permit, to let go kind of a thing. However, the word moto can be used to refer to a base, like a foundation. It's like, this is my base. The idea is that whenever somebody had something that they needed to come before the nobility to do, the nobility didn't move. Nobility are known for sitting. That is a mark of a noble person, is they don't get up and walk around and work. They sit. They sit in their one area. This is their foundation. This is their base of operations. And when somebody of lower status has something that they need from the noble person, they come to that person's place, they come to the base, and they are allowed into their presence to discuss or to petition or whatever. And so omoto means honorific place that also is where you are allowed and permitted to enter. So omoto just eventually becomes, this game treats it like an honorific you, a very, very classy, very high honorific you. And then it's followed by the particle no, which in this instance is possessive, so it means of. So omoto, you, no, your, tsuriki. Okay, this is a Chinese loanword. Tsuriki, I don't know how it came to be this way. I'm sure there's some sort of ancient Chinese literary reference or something that why this ended up being the way that it is. But tsuriki literally just means your mysterious power, your exceptional, wondrous abilities. Tsu means to pass through, to go through a thing, and then riki means power. So go through power, your power that pervades everything. Maybe that's what it is your power that like pierces through everything. I'm not entirely sure. Again, I don't know. That's just my best guess. And then we have tsuriki ni te, okay? Now this is a combination of two particles. Ni, like I mentioned, is the prepositional particle at, by, in, whatever. In this case, it is doing another by because, as we'll see here, over here, this is another passive verb that's happening. However, we have this te here. Te is a continuation particle. Now, the difference between this continuation and the continuations that we saw before, because if you remember, there were two verbs in the previous panel that were in the connective form, is what I'll call it, the continuation form. I believe the difference, because you can get away, you can stick the te onto those connective forms too, and it basically functions the same. However, I think the difference, and I may be wrong here, but I believe the difference is adding the te makes it a little more solid, a little more emphatic, and it also puts it a little bit more into direct time. So if you use the previous ones that don't have the te, if you use the previous connective forms that don't have the te, it's like these things just kind of generally happen. Like, let's say you have a whole paragraph where you just do connected, 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 and you don't use te. It's like all of these things happened, and they didn't happen at the same time per se. They kind of just happened here and there, but we're not really peculiar about the order. And I don't want the focus to be on the order, and I don't want to make it like a hard, strong statement. However, once you put the te on there, then the order becomes, then it's like this happened first, this happened second, this happened third, and it's a little more powerful, it's a little stronger. So, omoto no tsuriki ni te, so by your divine, by your wondrous powers, sukui tamawari. Sukui comes from the root verb suku, which means to save. However, we put it in the connective form, like I just mentioned the connective form, but if you notice there's not a te, because we're wanting to put this sukui and attach it to this tamo. Okay, well, tamawari, but the root word of this verb is tamau, okay? And the reason why we do this is because, again, we want these two words to not be like cleanly, neatly cut between it. It's not like was saved and then tamo. It's saved with tamo. Like it's all one thing. So these kind of like bring things a little bit closer together instead of neatly compartmentalizing them. So sukui, again, means to save or save, and then tamawari comes from the root verb tamo, like I just mentioned. Tamo means for a superior to bestow on an inferior. It's kind of like the modern kudasaru, okay, or kudasai. However, we go from tamo to tamawari. This again is once again a passive form. We go from tamo to tamawa, and then we have the di. And this di is once again a connective form, but it's the softer connective form. So, being saved and denoting that you doing this in this way, you are above me in the social ladder. You are bestowing the salvation by your majestic, wondrous power. And then we're continuing a sentence. Makoto ni, makoto just means truth or honest. And then we have this ni here, which again, ni has a lot of uses, okay? This is the thing about ni. Ni is everywhere. And not just modern Japanese, but in classical Japanese especially. Because in this instance, what it is functioning as, okay? And this is going to get really complicated. Well, it's not going to get super complicated. But this is functioning as the connective form of the verb nari, okay? The verb nari, which I don't know if we'll see, I don't think we see in this one, but nari is the ancient classical Japanese verb for to be. So for example, if I want to say, I am male, I'm a man, ware otoko nari. I am a man. Or what would be interesting, you could say, Amaterasu omikami wa okami nari. Amaterasu okami is a wolf. Okay? Is a great god. So nari just means to be. Now, the connective form of that, like we see in this tamawari, or as we saw with the passive forms of some of those verbs with the dare or the de, the connective form of nari can be nari, but it can also be ni. So basically what makoto ni is to be true continuing. But what that has ended up being, just to add an extra layer to this because we are dealing with the history of the Japanese language at this point, is this ends up being a way that you can turn a noun into an adjective or an adverb. And that's what's going on here. So makoto ni truly. So instead of truth, we go from truth to truly. And then we have osore o kusoro. So osore, the classical Japanese verb is osoru. Yeah, osoru. Osoru means to fear, to quake, to be afraid. Or in this case, I think the more apt comparison, because the idea of fear is very closely tied with the idea of awe-inspired, right? It's, you look at this thing, this majestic thing, and in a sense, you're kind of freaked out. Because like if this thing turns on you, like if you come before the gods, right? You come before this divine being, and it's so clearly more powerful than you, it's radiant and just amazing and clearly so powerful. If it turns on you, you're done skis. It's over. You're gone. And so there's a sense of fear. And I believe this is the same thing that happens in the Christian when they talk about fearing God. However, because this is a good being, this is a benevolent being, you're not so much afraid of it as you are awe-inspired by it. You're just like, whoa, that's insane. And so we go from osoru to osore, which takes this verb and turns it into a noun. So osore, fears, my awe. Okusoro. So oku comes from osh, which is the Japanese, I mean, even in modern Japanese, it's the same. It means abundant, lots of, or a lot of, lots of, many, much, those kinds of things. However, we go from oshi, oi, osh, to oku, which turns it into an adverb, because we are describing a verb that comes next, which is soro, okay? So, osore oku soro means to do a soro with much fear, with much awe. Now, soro is a fascinating word here, okay? Because soro is a humbling verb that means nari or haberi. Haberi was the older version, whereas soro is a little bit later. It's something that samurai used a lot. You see it a lot in The Tale of the Heike. But soro, I believe, comes from the root verb samurao. And now some of you are like, oh, samurao, that sounds like samurai, right? Again, I believe that's what happened, because one thing that happens in classical Japanese a lot is the original verb saburafu is how you would say it, saburau. But what happens is the ancient Japanese especially tended to emphasize the vowel sounds, and a lot of times the consonant sounds in words would fade away. So you go from saburafu to saurau, saurau goes saurau, saurau, soro is how that ended up becoming. And samurao, I forgot to mention what that actually means. Samurao means to serve. It means for an inferior to serve a superior. So soro comes from samurao, means to serve, and you would stick it on the end of verbs to mean that, like, to make something humble. It means like I am placing myself down here and I am placing you up there. I am here to serve you. So if you can see the way he is referring to Amaterasu is when Amaterasu does something, she bestows things to him. And when he does a thing for Amaterasu, he is serving her. Okay, continuing. Oop, go back. Okay, the next part here. Iza, kono hanagami zenrei o tsukushite. So, iza, I believe this comes from the verb izanao, which means to invite. So, iza just means like, let's do it. Like, well then, shall we? Let's go. You see this a lot in like in samurai stuff. I think Genji says it in Overwatch, but there's some other instances where samurai will say iza jinjou ni shobu. Iza just means like, okay, let's go. Jinjou ni means honorably or like fairly, and then shobu is a match or a fight. So iza jinjou ni shobu, it's like, okay, let's have an honorable fight. Let's go. Let's fight. Bring it on. So iza is like, well then, I'm offering this thing. I invite you to do this thing. Kono Hanagami, okay? So kono means this, and Hanagami is the name of this character here, is this brushstroke god. Hana means flower, Gami comes from kami, which means god, so flower god. So kono Hanagami, this is another thing that's worth mentioning, is that in modern Japanese too, but especially in classical Japanese, a lot of times what they would do is people would refer to themselves in the third person, not the first person, because again, the first person is a little strong, it's a little direct, it's a little like, this is what's happening. But the third person is a little more beat around the bush. It's a little more not as direct, not as strong, which is something that you want to do when you're around your superiors, is you don't want to step on their toes and overreach your authority. You don't want to make any hard claims. Well, maybe unless you do. But most of the time, you want to be very deferential around your superiors because that's the hierarchy, right? So he says, this god of flowers, this Hanagami, this lowly Hanagami is basically what he's saying. So, iza kono Hanagami. Now, what's interesting here is in classical Japanese, a lot of times you don't put a particle with the subject of the sentence. So Hanagami here is going to be doing the next part of the sentence, which, you know, tsukusu is the actual verb here that's doing the action. But a lot of times you just leave it off. I mean, you don't really need it. He is basically saying that, like, hey, I'm going to be doing this. Like, I am doing this thing and I'm leaving off the particle, which a lot of times in modern Japanese you can get away with, but it's not as common. But there's something about not having the particle here that just sounds old. It sounds ancient. It sounds majestic and dignified. But iza kono Hanagami, so therefore, or so then, I, Hanagami, zennei o tsukushite. Zennei is a Chinese loan word. Zen means all, completely. And rei means spirit, my force of will, my life force. So zennei o is like all my soul. O, and o is the thing, again, that denotes the object of the sentence. So the zennei, so all my soul is going to be receiving the action of tsukushite, which comes from the root verb tsukusu, which means to use up. Okay, to use completely, to completely put all of my soul into this thing. However, we go from tsukusu to tsukushi, which again means that is the form that we use if we want to add extra things on it. And here we add the te. So if you can see, we add the tsukushi, which turns it into that connective form. But then we want to make it like a hard connection. You know, it's like a compartmentalizing this thing. Tsukushi te. I use all of my spirit. I use up all of my spirit, and then Omoto no tabiji ni hanaka o sasage tatematsuran. Okay? So omoto, we know what that is you. So omoto no is possessive no, your. Tabiji comes from two words, and this is not a Chinese loan word. This is native Japanese. Tabi means travels, and ji means road. So your time on the road in your travels. Tabiji is all along your pathway, your path of travels. Tabiji ni. Now this ni is an actual preposition. It means on, in, at. So on the road, on your travels, I think is the best way. So on your honorable travels. Hanaka. So hana comes from flower, just native Japanese word for flower. And then ka, I don't know if this is a native Japanese word or if this is a Chinese loan word, but ka, I think it is a native Japanese word because it can be part of kaoru, which means to smell nice, perfume. To kaoru means to smell wonderfully. So flowers kaoru, okay, means they smell nice. So hanaka is the sweet scent of flowers. Hanaka o, which again is the flower scent, the sweet scent of flowers is going to be receiving the action, which is sasage tatematsuran, okay? Sasage comes from the classical Japanese word sasagu, which means to offer up, okay? To give to a superior. It's like I'm giving something, but it's not that I'm bestowing something on an inferior, it's that I'm offering up a thing to a superior. And then we go from sasagu to sasage because that's the connective form. And again, this is the soft connection, so it means that we are basically combining this with the following verb to get a bigger verb. So sasage tatematsuran. And this is funny because sasage in this instance, means to offer up to a superior, right? But this verb tatematsuran, which comes from tatematsuru, means the same thing. Now, the reason why they do this, right, is because he's saying that he wants to give. He wants to give the sweet scent of flowers to Amaterasu on her travels. However, the verb sasage, sasagu means to offer up. But the verb tatematsuran, tatematsuru, which means kind of the same thing, eventually became yet another way to humble one's speech. So whenever he does a thing, tatematsuru means, again, to offer up to a superior. He is saying that I give, but I give so humbly. And so this tatematsuru almost, I don't want to say it lost its meaning because you can use it and it is used in classical Japanese that way, but it becomes, well, it's a thing that you stick on the end of verbs to make things humble. And we go from tatematsuru to tatematsura, which is the mizenke, which means the incompleted form. It means that their verb is happening, but it's not done yet. And this is the verb stem. I guess this is the verb form that you use for negation. It's a verb form that you use for passive, as we have seen. And it's also for this instance that we use for volition, because that's what the tatematsura mu. You stick the mu on it, and it becomes volitional. It's, this is my intention. I do this freely. I do this of my will. It's not that it just happens. It's that I actively do this. Now, damu can also mean something into the effect of like, I'm not entirely sure about this thing, because I believe the connection there is when you actively, willfully do a thing, you don't necessarily know that it's going to work out. Again, if you saw in a previous video, I can't remember where I talked about this, but the idea is that things that happen naturally, things that just happen, that aren't the result of a force of will, are superior, I guess you could say. They happen. They don't have to try. They just are. They just do, and it works out for them. However, us lowly beings, us willful, volitional beings, we make efforts. We have will, and we try to go out and do a thing purposefully. But we are just lowly beings, so therefore there is the chance that we will fail at that thing, that we will not succeed. And so because of that, the verb form for expressing volition, expressing intention, and expressing doubt or being unsure about something are the same thing. So basically this little part here is, on your journeys, I offer up to you the sweet scent of flowers. Okay? And I believe that's the end of the, yes. So let's go back one more time, do a TLDR of this whole thing. Here he pushes the thing, pushes the cloak beside him. Okay. O warera ga jibo Amaterasu o Mikami. Our gracious, our compassionate mother, heaven, great goddess, heaven shining. Mononoke ni tsukare, mononoke ni tsukare fuzeraretaru wagami o. So, I myself, being possessed by spirits and sealed away by them, being possessed by and sealed away by a spirit, have been saved by your illustrious, your wondrous powers, have been saved by your wondrous powers, and truly am in great awe, and humbly in great awe. Well then, therefore, so then, I, Hanagami, using up all of my soul. Go back. Using up all my soul. Okay. Offer up to you, humbly, the sweet scent of flowers on your esteemed travels. And then he, does a thing. And this kanji here means Saki. Saki means to bloom. So you get the ability to make flowers bloom. Cool. Okay, so that's the end of that. I hope this one actually is a little bit shorter, but you know what? I feel like I'm doing an okay job. I'm explaining enough. Anyways, I don't have any other cultural commentary like I did in the previous one to end this. So, again, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned something from it, if you are learning regular Japanese or classical Japanese, even though I can't imagine there's a whole lot of you, or you just enjoyed the fact that you now know some interesting things about Okami and how the makers of this game use classical Japanese to evoke this sense of grandeur, the sense of majesty and dignity and ancient power. If you enjoyed it, please give the video a like, and please subscribe to the channel because there are still lots more brush techniques that we need to get through, and I don't even think this video that I'm pulling from uses all of them, and I know there are little power-up versions where there's still little one-offs that the brushstroke gods give you, the celestial I don't know what you call it, the constellation gods, that they talk about this. And again, there's also going to be plenty more. Once we're done with Okami, there is going to be other video games and stuff that I want to go over, and eventually even transition into some anime, although that might be a little bit tougher, but I'll see if I can make it work. Anyway, so please subscribe to the channel. Please share it with your friends, especially since the sequel of Okami is going to be coming up, and I fully intend to get that game and play it because I did very much enjoy the first one. But that's going to be it for now. If you've been watching all the way up to the end here, I thank you sincerely. Ito katajike no koso haberi kere. That's my own personal way of trying to translate. Actually, what I should say is Ito osore o kusoro. No, Ito osore o kusoro. Yeah, that's what I should say. This would use some of the phraseology that was in here. Anyways, thank you so much, guys. Have a good one. We'll see you later.